couple things I'd like to bring up. I know we're going to go week to week, but one thing I think you've always heard me say. I always look to the signal and try to block out all the other noise. So what I'd like to do during these is maybe touch on a few of the things I see happening before we go into questions. But first, before we start, I do want to recognize the passing of John Dingell. I just spoke on the floor about him. What an amazing life. When you think from one aspect, he served as a page. He was here when FDR and was a part of the Day to Live in Infamy. So serving 59 years in the House. First thing that I got to know John Dingell was when I came. I came in 2007. He was already an icon in so many different ways. But I watched the respect that he had from our side of the aisle, where our members would still go to him, ask his advice, the respect that he had. And you have to respect his service. When he became chair of Energy and Commerce, he took in almost all the jurisdiction of everybody else. I jokingly said on the floor he loved that committee so much he didn't think there was a need for any other committee. And he ran it that way. And it was a different Congress. But the other thing, you continue to admire him even in the years that he left, because he believed in public service, and it wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon. But you think of the ever-adapting world and the changes that we have. From social media, here he was, having served a number of years, Twitter comes into effect, and he was very good on Twitter. My favorite one, and I talked about in the chamber, I thought this was the place that it could be probably the most bipartisan advice he could give us. He did this in, I think in July of 2017. His tweet was, "I've been trying to repeal and replace the United States Senate since 1955, and no luck." But he was always humorous. But I do reach out with our prayers to his wife, Debbie, who serves with us, and really the legacy that he will leave, I think, people on all sides of the aisle. We could have different philosophical opinions, but he always gave people the opportunity to say their piece, say their advice, but he would hold a very strong gavel as he went through. A couple points I want to touch on now is just a couple days ago we had the State of the Union by President Trump. I thought he did a terrific job. I thought he laid out really for the House something different than people expected he was going to do. I thought he was conciliatory in his remarks, but he also looked about the greatness of America. Fantastic guests that he brought through and the way he weaved it through the speech from where he started to where he ended. I think when you talk to all members and you talk about that speech, they would look to certain moments of certain guests that touched them in a manner that they hadn't probably not been touched before in the State of the Union. He started with the World War II vets, but then when he brought it back, a World War II vet also bringing out, saving an individual from the concentration camps coming through as well. Very moving, but it also taught and made America look back to the exceptionalism of this country and made us think about the other things that he talked about, the challenges of what we have. But we've risen to that occasion before to solve them, that we can do the same again. And you can do it in divided government. And I hope as though when I looked to the Democrats, they saw an individual that wanted to work with them. I was a little disappointed in some of the actions, though, and I'll give you a few of them. When the president talked about a few facts about low unemployment, think about it, especially for women, African Americans, disabled Americans. This is a place that all Americans should be excited about. And for the same point that the president said, no, keep standing, you're going to like my next line, that he honored them for their win. I think at the same time when they stayed seated, when he was talking about where America stood with employment, that's where they should have looked to the better angels and probably stood up. I looked at when we talk about lifting up all communities, when we talk about working together and continuing to build. I'm disappointed about what I saw come out yesterday on what it would do to our communities and our middle class on this new Green Deal, how it would affect those who are the most vulnerable, for the economic ladder to rise, gives me a real challenge. And then when I think about comparing where we were when you put those first 10 bills for HR numbers, you save those for what could be the most important. We thought it was the economy. We do tax and others. They talk about an election. The president of the State of the Union honored them for winning in a fair election. But what are one of the first things the Democrats want to do? Change the ability where it's no longer fair, where the FEC would no longer be bipartisan with the same number of Democrats to Republicans. But no, one party would have a stronger number than the other. That's not the direction America wants to go. There'll be wins and there'll be losses, but they do not expect that someone puts their thumb on the scale. And those are the differences and the challenges that we have. But I still believe that we can make a difference in a bipartisan way. We have a challenge right now as to our appropriation bills going forward. I'm hopeful we'll come to a conclusion. We need to this weekend so we can vote next week. Talking to a number of Democrats individually, it's amazing of how many of them say, I'd like to solve the border security and I'm for providing more money for barriers. Unfortunately, their leadership seems to keep saying no. So this weekend will tell us a lot about where we're going, but I'm hopeful next week we can get this all solved and continue to move forward on our next challenges. Let me stop there. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Leader, the negotiators on the conference committee say that they're making a lot of progress. There is talk of barrier funding. You've talked to the president a lot. Are you confident that the president will get behind a deal, even if it includes funding for a barrier but not for a wall?
I can't say what the president will and will not do, but in my conversation with the president, I know he wants us to find a legislative solution. He wants us to work on this, and I have heard some positive talk. I just have not seen the actions on the Democrat side. We did a bipartisan CODEL down to the border. They will talk about more money for a barrier, but then they want to put more restrictions not to be able to use that. I think that's more of a challenge of going forward. But I do believe at the end of the day that we'll all be in the same place. We know at the end of the day we want the president to be able to sign this, so we will work together to make sure whatever we bring out there that the president would be supporting it.
Do you see if this deal does come together, kind of a coalition of, people in the middle, Democrats, Republicans, but then it's the folks on the margins who can't support this because it doesn't veer far enough to that side. That's kind of the coalition that you have to put together. And if that's in fact the case, obviously the president probably has to take a hit on that, and Nancy Pelosi probably has to take a hit on that.
I don't. The challenge would be to get that solved. The speaker would have to let the bill come to the floor. I don't see the president taking hits because the president is the one that has been working to find common ground. He's the one who made 4 different offers. So I think he's been more flexible in all the meetings that I've been in than any of the others. And remember, during these meetings where the president was flexible, where he'd looked to Durbin and Durbin wanted to change some policy of how you do asylum, and we do it back in Honduras and El Salvador, the president was open to discussing that. But much of the time, Speaker Pelosi said, I can't talk about anything until you open up the government. Well, now government is opened up. So there should be change in behavior on the Democrat side. There's some talk, but I haven't seen the actions yet.
And to follow up, if they're going to get, as you say, they are in the majority, going to get Democratic votes, there's going to have to be a give to get those Democrats to vote yes. There's going to have to be something that they say, yeah, this is something that we support.
Yeah, I cannot see Speaker Pelosi's belief that there'll be not $1 for any type of wall or barrier. I know many in her... Even you look at her number 2, Steny Hoyer. You go to her committee chairs. They say barriers work and walls work. They say provide the money. Own ag chair says give Trump the money. So I think really your question and the answer would be to it would really stop with the speaker. The speaker has the control whether she'll bring it to the floor or not. I believe if it came to the floor, there would be enough bipartisan votes for it to pass.
Mr. Leader, you mentioned the Green New Deal very briefly. Is it worth even expanding on? I mean, what do you think about it?
Well, it's not in bill form, so it's hard to expand. I mean, Speaker Pelosi calls it the Green Dream or something. I think it has a lot of work to go forward. I'm really looking to, one, how do we keep our economy? How do we make sure our environment's protected at the same time? I think we could find common ground on that. It's interesting in this Green New Deal, all the buildings, all the homes will have to be redone, 0 emissions. I mean, I know a lot of people are talking about what do you do with animals, what do you do, and her own speaker's calling it a green dream. So I think there's challenges to it, even in her own conference with starting.
Do you think, and again, a lot depends on these negotiations, but if President Trump, first of all, do you think President Trump may still declare a national emergency on the border? And if he does, and there's a measure to disapprove of that, what kind of vote would that be for you and your members? Would it be a challenge, or have they sort of, they have a lot of members are constitutional conservatives, so that might be an opportunity to break from the president?
A lot of hypotheticals in your questions. So if I could take your question, tell me if I'm asking wrong. Could we come to an agreement and the president still declare a national emergency? Is that kind of the question? I think there's an opportunity. We could come to an agreement. I mean, we have the power to come to an agreement where I think the president would not agree to a national emergency. I think that's what the president said in the State of the Union. Do your job. You have the ability to do it legislatively. The president said, okay, I'll open up government because you said you'll discuss it once it's open. So now's our opportunity window. But the president also said he has a responsibility for the safety of all Americans. And I don't think anybody questions his legal authority to declare a national emergency. So he's giving us the opportunity that he does not have to go there, that we can solve this legislatively. I think the question about whether he does it or not is the outcome and the work that we achieve in this. So I think if the Democrats do nothing, he still has to do his job to protect us, that yes, he could do that. If you did that, you could bring a vote up for a bill. The president would have to sign or veto that. I don't see any way that would get overridden if it was vetoed in any shape or form. So I think it's really on the members in the House and the Senate to solve this problem legislatively and not put the president in a position to have to do that. Yes?
You mentioned the State of the Union moment when the Democratic women were standing up cheering, but not for other things, and it sounds like it rubbed a lot of Republicans the wrong way. I know Liz Cheney said something similar. Is it because you guys felt like they were rubbing it in your faces, or was it a reflection of that this is just a sensitive subject for Republicans, obviously given the dwindling ranks of GOP women?
No, I mean, I think you're mixing what we were talking about. It wasn't about women. The president wasn't, he was talking about where accomplishments in this country is at. The most moving moment to me was when he first introduced the World War II vets. You've looked at their age, you look at the frailty of their body, and not only stood the excitement of thrusting his hand up. I think they stood more than on the Democrat side. And there was so much in that speech that wasn't about a Republican or Democrat, it was about an America. And that's where we have to put politics aside. Why can't we all celebrate more people working and reaching all demographics? We should all be proud of that. That's, I think, comes to the point that almost people go in just to dislike a president, so even if he says happy birthday to you, you're upset. I think that's where we need to stop. Yes?
If and when a deal to avoid a shutdown does come together, will you all need the president to come out publicly and support it before Republicans in the House are willing to get behind it?
Well, I think Leader McConnell's been very clear that he doesn't want to move anything from the very beginning if it's not going to become law. And I think we're all in this negotiation in the process. The president took the speaker at her word that if he opened up government, she would be willing to work on these other issues. The question's still out there. Will she do that? So I think it's good for the entire country that whatever we pass becomes law, so we're not back into the situation before. So it would be, in my opinion, right that we know where the president stands before we vote on these bills. Why put the country through something like that? Yes, sir.
Mr. Leader, you and your Republican colleagues have directed a lot of fire at Ms. Omar and Ms. Tlaib and Ms. Ocasio-Cortez recently over their comments on Israel, accusing them of anti-Semitism. And Democratic leadership has not responded to this in any reasonable way. Your comments on that, and also, do you think that it is possible to be critical of the government of Israel and their policy choices without being an anti-Semite?
It's possible, but I think the language they are using is wrong, and I would say their leadership is wrong for not standing up to it. There's situations in our conference where a member does something that is wrong. I think you've seen from my own actions that I take action about it. I watched Speaker Pelosi at the very first weeks where you had another member, freshman, stand up and say something about the president that I thought was unbecoming of a member of Congress from any side of the aisle. She said she wasn't in the censorship issue. When a member on our side of the aisle said something, they were very clear about what they thought should have happened. We took action on our own side. I think when they stay silent, they're just as guilty.
Do you see these cases as being directly comparable to the Steve King case?
Yes, and more so. And I think this will not be the end of this. And if they do not take action, I think you'll see action from myself on ways that this cannot sustain itself. It's unacceptable in this country, especially when you sat back and you thought about and you listened to what this country went through in World War II. The things that people put up prior to getting that point were nowhere near anything like that. But why stay silent now? Have we not learned from the mistakes of the past? Have you not, in a leadership position, have a responsibility? I believe I have a responsibility with my own members and others. And I believe I took that action. I would say the same for is there. And not just with the speaker. I think everybody in that leadership that stays silent. And if you follow what these congresswomen are saying and doing, even to some of the other members on the other side of the aisle, like Lee Zeldin, and the attacks, that's wrong, and it should stop. They have a window and opportunity to say something, they have not. Yes?
Just following up on that, can you elaborate on how long that window of opportunity is before you would want to take action, and what kind of action that would look at?
Look, I won't say ahead of time what we'll do, but this is what they are doing to me goes across, and if it's acceptable, it will only grow. I've watched some of these actions take place on campuses. I've watched some of these actions take place to others. We have a responsibility to stand up, but if it is allowed to happen in the halls of Congress, it will only perpetuate the problem and grow to something much more than we would ever desire it to be. I think the window has passed. If you cannot take action when you first hear the words of what they said, then you are susceptible to supporting what they are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Soon, if the window's passed.
All right, good to see you, okay, thank you. Back upstairs. Another remark.